Thanks, Josh, and a warm welcome to everyone to Nottingham School of Art and Design. For those, if it's your first visit, welcome. But particularly welcome on behalf of Bollington Gallery. We're very lucky tonight, personally for me, to have these two wonderful people with us. Obviously you've had a chance to see the film by Emily in Bollington Gallery. And the talk tonight is very much part of an ongoing programme that runs through Bollington Gallery, which is part of its public programme of events, talks, screenings, etc., etc. So, warm welcome to you. I should say who I am. My name is Duncan Higgins. I'm a Professor of Visual Arts and Research here at Nottingham Trent. I'm also Professor in Fine Art at the Norwegian National Academy in Bergen in Norway. So again, warm welcome. That's me to start with. What we'd like to do is, and again, we're so lucky to have you both here tonight. I'll do a very brief introduction. For those who don't know Emily Andersen and Ruth Fainlight, I'll just have a brief introduction. And then we'll go into a sort of conversation, very much led by Emily's, I have to say, beautiful film, which then opens up a conversation with Ruth about, I want to know what it felt like to be filmed, particularly by Emily, over quite an extended period of 10 years, and actually what Ruth actually feels about the film at this point. And in doing that, I think we'll open up some conversation about language, about expression, about kind of maybe some of the motivations in both the writing and the Emily's practice, which I do, well, I've followed you for quite a few years now, but we're colleagues. Then we have a real privilege that Ruth is going to read for us a selection of poems, and we'll have the poems up on the screen while she's reading. And then the last part will be very much following that conversation, and then we'd like to open it up to any of yourselves. If you have any comments, questions, we have them here, so we can ask away. Okay? And we have about an hour and a half, so maybe our conversation will be about an hour, and then we have half an hour for the discussion. Introductions, I find that always quite odd, because Emily and myself have been colleagues in the School of Art and Design for a number of years. We've travelled together, we've argued and shared things together. We kind of are very aware we are, as an art school, within a broader educational, going through quite significant change in relation to curriculum, pedagogy, etc., etc. And I think, as a kind of personal thing, I'm so glad we have people like Emily still working in the art school. Certain values, certain commitments to practice, I really think are invaluable. So, thank you. Ruth, I met tonight. I have been aware of Ruth's work. By way of introduction again, I'm sure many of you know that Ruth's poetry, I think, well, she's a poet, she's has been a translator, a dramatist. I think it's one of those distinct voices in culture. I think that in an introduction, that's I think what I wanted to say. It's a kind of really distinct voice. My particular interest in Ruth's writing, in her poem Vertical, from Another Full Moon, you talk about the liberating power of writing, and in the poem you say, I'm released by language, which sets me free from whatsoever definitions. And there's something about that kind of ferocious commitment, independence, I think that you both share. That's my view. Maybe some of that we can explore when we get talking, but it's something very special, this commitment. It takes very different shape for both of you, I know it does, within your individual languages. How your language and forms of expression are not the same. And yet there's something really extraordinary in the film that's drawn together, both how it's visually made, how it's been beautifully edited, and how the text and the image begin to talk together. I think I've watched the film 5-6 times, and each time it's like a new film. And I find things in what Ruth's saying and how the images relate to each other absolutely compelling. It's like I've missed something what was I looking at last time. To me, that's really special. It maybe speaks about pace, about a certain rhythm, about a certain notion of time, attention, imagination, which I think is really important. It has an intimacy and a really important emotional value, which perhaps culturally might be at odds with the short attention span, kiss me quick, tip-top Instagram culture. And I think there's something very beautiful about spending time with the film and then actually going away and reading your poems and having this sort of really important sense of, I think for me, it's time and rhythm and pace and imagination. I know both of you in your practices have dealt with very important, often very contested areas of subject. And I think, again, that's a real testament to both of you, how you're willing to deal with really important questions or expressions around very contested areas. And thank goodness you've both been doing that. We need it more than ever, my feeling is. So that's my introduction. It's a kind of big thank you to both of you, to be honest. So, I'm sure you've seen this one. There's a really lovely essay in that, which gives you can pick one up afterwards, which gives you a really good insight into something about the film, how it was made, something about the process and method. Because I know Emily, I've kind of followed this process, and I kind of have that sense of how it started, but I'm actually more interested in Ruth. How did it start? How did it start, the process? I know from Emily's point of view, but for you, can you remember the first moment this suddenly was like, oh, this might happen?
No, I can't.
Great. Emily, you tell us what happened.
Well, back to the market.
No, how you started.
Okay, it started, I'll tell you the story which I've recorded as well, but it's a fascinating story, and it's just how life can be serendipitous. And I would travel from London to Nottingham, and I teach here usually 2 days a week, and I've been doing that for over a decade. And I was on a train going from Nottingham to London. I picked up an Independent, so that newspapers, that shows you how long ago it was when they were things like newspapers. And in the paper there was a review of Ruth's book, New and Collected Poems, which was this huge compendium. This one which you'll read from. And it was a really good review, a poetry review, and there was a portrait of her which had been taken by somebody at the Independent, I guess. And I tore it out thinking, I know this person, I've seen this person around. And I went in my area in West London, and the next day in the farmer's market on Saturday, I saw Ruth buying food in the farmer's market. So I went up to her and said, are you this person? Is this really interesting? So she's thinking, who's this loony, accosting me? But I said, I'm a photographer. It'd be very interesting to meet you and to maybe photograph you. And I gave her my card. And about a month later, I think, you emailed me.
Yeah, a few weeks
later you emailed me. I couldn't believe it, because I thought for sure that this was so random to just run up and say, this is you, would you know? But there was something compelling about the writing, the review was so compelling, and I'd seen Ruth, so those two things came together. And I know very little about poetry, but I'm a portraitist as a photographer mainly, so I'm very interested in people and meeting people and photographing people, so somehow I didn't want to let it go, and that's what happened. And so then we did that first session, which is that picture on the left, in Ruth's flat. And then after a while, we talked a lot. It's the one which is in the book.
Yes.
And we talked quite a lot. Well, we talked a lot, because both of us seemed to talk a lot to each other. I mean, we were interested in what each other had to say, I think, is what happened. And I realised from that meeting that there was more than photographs could tell me, I wanted to say more than a photograph could tell. And I've always wanted to make a film and finish a film. I've started films, I have made a few small films, but this seemed like a really good situation as a possibility. So I started asking Ruth if that would be a possibility. And I think to begin with, you didn't think it was a particularly great idea. I don't know what you thought. I don't think that you jumped at the idea of having a film made about you. But I think as we got to know each other better, we were having a conversation that then became a conversation that was also being recorded, and then it was being recorded with a camera, but very, very slowly over a long period of time. It took 10 years, to...
But you weren't making a film for 10
No,
years.
but I was thinking about it
Yeah,
for a while.
But
Probably 5 years of making it, 4 years, yeah.
I think we began before COVID.
Yeah.
Not much before.
Or the interview being done long before,
Yes,
2014.
yes.
But the actual filming,
Filming.
yeah,
Yes.
sure. I've made a lot of stills.
Yes.
So that's how it began. It did begin with a conversation.
Oh, absolutely. We just had, I just knew that we could become friends.
Yeah.
It was just a serendipitous reality that we had met in that strange way. And we could become friends, and we have become friends, very good friends, I think, yes, and, yeah.
And it wasn't, the other thing was, the reason it's a triptych is that I wrote a huge grant to make this film for the Arts, Humanities and Research Council, which took a couple of years, an awful lot of time, and people in this room have helped me do that, which is really great. Of course, the AHRC, to get the money out of them is like, I don't know, it's 1 in whatever the ratio is. So I didn't get the grant, but what I did get was a really clear idea about what I wanted to do. And one of the iterations, apart from the main film, was to make this three projected film or 3 screened film. So that's how that was. It's actually a video, but it would ideally be each of them. But so that's how that's come about.
So in terms of, I mean, there's something really, again, really great, beautiful about a friendship. That's how it started, rather than somebody comes to you with a script and
Yes.
says, Ruth, we want you to do this and this and this. Then walk into the room and
Yes.
take 2, you're not doing it, come on, we have to do it again. Maybe that allowed something to happen. That what I was interested in, what I found in your poetry, this idea of it's in the language that you find it. So it's not that you predetermine the content so much.
Absolutely, you're correct. The language produces the subject almost.
And sometimes
Or the
that takes,
development of the subject, yes.
and sometimes that just takes time.
Yes.
And I think creatively you can push it sometimes and it just falls to pieces. And kind of listening to that process, I think that's what I get from both of you, actually. Is this sense of really listening, and in this case to your conversation. Because it's very intimate, what Emily, I think there must be a real friendship to allow Emily to look at you through a lens when you're boiling an egg, having a cup of tea. It feels really natural. It's not like, again, a director's going to say, Ruth, please sit down like this. So what was it like having her in your house all the time?
Well, I was used to having her in my house as a friend before anything arose about the film. So then it just became something else that happened when Emily was visiting me. Yeah.
But it does feel natural.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, one of the points where you literally have to say stop.
Yes. But I don't really feel that there are any moments when I wanted you to stop and you refused. I think we reached exhaustion point at more or less the same, not the same moment, but pretty close together. There wasn't any argument about, no, I'm going to carry on, I want to finish it.
No, it's the opposite of that. Every now and then, there were certain, well now we're making with carrying on. But yeah, there were times when the weather just wasn't good enough to go outside, for example.
That's true, yeah.
So then we would just do something else.
But you weren't working to a kind of narrative script or anything?
No, not at all.
I mean,
I work very intuitively, Duncan. All I knew was I wanted to make this film. And then it was a question of how to do that. And that's, I would just get ideas. I'd have various scenes that I thought I wanted to film. And I wanted to hear from Ruth about writing and how her process of writing. And understand more about that. And interrogate it in a way, isn't it? In a way, it's
But the scenes that you envisaged,
yeah,
we didn't discuss them. We never talked about what you were going to do.
no, that's right.
I mean, I let you have your head, one could say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's true.
Mm.
No, I say we wanted to do a breakfast scene, I remember that. And we had to set that up with the egg boiling and so on.
Yes.
And I remember you saying, do you really want me eating? And I said, I think it's really good. Yeah. And actually, that's a lovely scene. In fact, that's the poster, that picture of you sitting
Yes.
at the table with an egg, you know.
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. So in terms of its duration, I'm just trying to imagine this two-way conversation happening. It starts initially with a kind of shared interest in each other about. And then, presumably as the process started, say a bit more, so you were filming but you were also recording audio, or did you do that separately?
It started, I had a friend who is a professional interviewer who came from Germany, who was coming to visit me, and I said it would be great if you would start with an interview of Ruth. And so we spent 3 days. She spent 3 days, I was filming and Ruth was being talking, yeah. And then sometimes I talked to you lot before about the sort of questions that I thought would be good, and then she also had her questions, and she's been had 30 years of experience interviewing people. So we started with that. That was the basis of it. And then when we edited, we cut the sound and then the photograph and then the pictures. So we were working from the soundtrack.
Really?
From the interview that he made, then I continued interviewing Ruth, and there was more interview later on, and there were bits that I felt needed to be asked, and that's how it worked. But meanwhile, I was then filming, and I said, let's go to the local garden and we'll park, and we'll film there, or we'll film inside and so on, and round the flat. And I'm very interested in slow filming. I'm always thinking of Laura Mulvey, actually, Riddles of a Sphinx. You know, there's sort of an homage to people like that who I was very interested in very early on in my career as a photographer.
Mm.
So I don't do a 360, but I almost do a 360 of Ruth's sitting room, for example.
Mm. So this idea of pace, because I went away and I went and looked at some of your writing, and obviously when you're reading it inside. I don't read out loud, I read internally. And the words have a pace, and the line and the structure has a rhythm. And
That's called poetry.
Finally, I realised. Great. But it's something about the pace, and I think whether it's as an academic or in my world, consuming information very differently now. And there's something about the way it allows you the space of thinking, which is really important. And time doesn't function in that linear way that perhaps we learn to behave how to do it. So I think the film has something of that as well. And because you've looped it, I think that's partly I've come in at so many different points when I've watched it. You're never sure time-wise, you just don't worry at the beginning and the end. So tell me a bit more about this, Emily, this idea of pace. Because you're mainly a stills photographer, and you work how? Very analog? I know you do, but maybe you should say something about your kind of discipline of the image.
I suppose I'm very, very interested in the frame, and I'm interested in analogue in that I use film mainly as in old-fashioned film. I still have a darkroom, probably one of the last photographers in London to have a black and white darkroom. And ideally, had I got huge grants, I would have shot on 16mm, but it's a much slower. 16mm would have been very beautiful to film, but now with video you can make very beautiful film anyway, because there's just so much post that you can do, and with colourists and so on, so I can't say necessarily that would be better. But I'm very interested in where the still meets the moving image. So I'm filming stills that move. So that's what I think that's what you're talking about. That gives a certain feel. Somebody like Andrei Tarkovsky, I could cite, or Bellatar, or Chantal Ackerman. I mean, there are a lot of people who work like this, but sometimes you're not sure, and I particularly emphasise that in this, you're not sure whether you're watching something that's moving, an image in the frame that is moving or is still, and I like that. It's a sort of complex place to be, a complexity of the image, you're not sure. And lots can happen in that time. And I don't know how that reflects. I don't know if that reflects the process of making, of the process of writing. But I suppose where I do think it possibly does is I go back to the same, when I'm filming or talking to you, I go back and back. I go back to the same question again and again, or the same scene again and again, and film it. And when you're talking about writing, you're sometimes talking about leaving a poem for years before you go back to it.
Yeah.
So there is some correlation there.
Yes.
Between time and writing something, I think. Or time and making the picture something.
I mean, writing a poem covers an awful span of time.
Yeah.
Usually, not always, sometimes, rarely, I can write something and I can tell that it's almost finished. It's not going to need much more work, but usually I have to leave it and read it and make a lot of changes and keep going as long as I can.
Mm-hmm.
And then stop, and then 3 weeks or 3 months later, go back to it. Or go back to it sooner and keep working for quite some time. Consecutively, I mean, not leaving a gap. But from the very first words that I write down, because of course I always write them, I don't tap them in. I used to use a typewriter, now I use a computer. Of course I do that, but the important work actually happens with writing by hand. That's to say, the important work is the very beginning, the very first lines. And that the first draft might only represent about a quarter or less of the poem. I mean, you won't use more than a quarter or less than that of the poem. You keep putting in new material. But that, yes, it covers a good period of time.
Sure, I mean, there is that, and again, really lovely bit in the film where you're describing some of the process, and we get to see these manuscripts and it's handwritten. And I think, again, how do you think things into a form? And there's something for me about handwriting that still connects very directly to thinking through it. By doing it, you think it. And there is something about touch and a typewriter, or now laptops, great, but it is different, I think.
Yes.
How ideas become a form. And you've got beautiful handwriting as well.
certainly not as good as it used to be.
Sure.
But because I write less.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you find then that, I can imagine then you have a series of these, we'll call them poems, ongoing. Do you feel they're following certain themes, or you have groups of poems, or they stand very much as single pieces on their own right, or you see them very much as part of a kind of collective body of something?
Well, I've written poems to themes, and I've written poems for about, well, half a dozen to a dozen artists' books. That's to say, I've worked with artists who said, look, I've done these prints, it's usually prints as it turns out. And I think that it would be nice if we could make a book, you write some poems.
Okay, yeah.
And so I've done this. Beautiful books, in some cases, you know, with artists who can sell their books, you know, like for £7,000 for a book or something like that. And it's nothing to do with the text. I don't kid myself and imagine that people are paying that sort of money for the poems. No, they're paying it for the artwork. But of course it enriches it to have poems there. Yes. Or I've done small pamphlets, almost, by young artists, you know, if they're up for sale, they're very little money. That isn't the point. That isn't the point, really.
Yeah.
But all right. So, for example, one of the poems I'm going to read is called "Elegant Sybil." Now, quite a well-known American printmaker called Leonard Baskin approached me. Oh, this is a long time ago, in the 1970s or something like that. And he said, he's the man who did the images for Crow, for Ted Hughes' Crow. And he was a very good friend of Hughes. And we were very good friends, or fairly good friends anyways, I think, of Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath, yes. So, when I say me, I mean my husband and myself, yeah. And so, Leonard must have said to Ted, look, I'm doing these drawings of Sibyls. Sibyls, you know, are prophetic women of the ancient world, mostly of the ancient world, but you can make them contemporary as well. I have some contemporary Sibyls, yes. And so Leonard said to me, I'm doing these prints, and Ted tells me that you know a lot about, you know, you're interested in this subject, and maybe you could write some poems. So I did. I had this wonderful year where everything that seemed to come my way gave me more information about Sibyls. Yeah. And I did a lot of research, which I love doing. And so I wrote, so we had this beautiful book.
Yes.
Yeah. And then I did another beautiful book by a Brazilian artist who lives here in England, called Ana Maria Pacheco. And we did a book about Sheba and Solomon. Yeah, and that involved doing research, which was a great pleasure. And she made a beautiful book out of it. And etc. So I can have a subject and work to it. Or I can feel a theme coming. Not that anyone has asked me to do it, but I'm somehow always writing poems about trees or something or other. But about half of the time, I don't know, I can't possibly say how much because I've never worked it out, but let's keep to half, because that's what I said.
Okay.
It's just a separate poem comes. That's to say, I'm inspired, that's the only word I can use. I'm inspired to write a poem, and I work on the poem. And then I'm inspired to write another poem. There need to be a connection, and connect together. But there is the commissions, as it were.
Sure, you would, yeah.
The people like Lenny Bassett
Yeah.
or Anne Marie asking if I want to work on this project, or then I think I'd like to write about, or as I say, I've noticed that I'm writing a lot of poems about birds or whatever, and I think what's the connection, and I keep writing them. It forms a group.
Yes, listen,
Or
I always about that.
Yeah.
It's these meetings again.
Yes.
It's not like you're shouting at the world or it's shouting at you.
Yes.
You find these meetings. Like Emily coming up
Yes.
saying you this
That's
in
right.
the Independent. Maybe this is a good moment, as you mentioned it, to read for us.
Shall I?
It's been a great pleasure.
Yes, well, I'm going to read poems. I mean, this enormous book is from about a dozen of my collections put together, with a new section as well. And then I've got my most recent book,
Yes.
and so I'll read a few from those as well. Okay, so is there a poem up there? Is it called Passenger?
Yes.
Yeah. Good. Not watching trains pass and dreaming of when I would become that traveller, glimpsed inside the carriage, flashing past a watching, dreaming child, but being the passenger, staring out at tall apartment blocks whose stark forms cut against the setting sun and bars of livid cloud, balconies crowded with ladders, boxes, washing, dead pot plants, into lighted steamy windows where women are cooking and men just home from work, shoes kicked off and sleeves rolled up are smoking, stretched exhausted in their sagging, half-bought chairs. Under viaducts where children, busy with private games and errands, wheel and call like birds at dusk, all that urban glamour of anonymity which makes me suffer such nostalgia for a life rejected and denied, makes me want to leave the train, walk down the street back to my neighbourhood of laundrettes, newsagents, grocery shops, become again that watching, dreaming girl, and this time live it out. One moment only was enough before a yawning tunnel mouth obscured us both, left her behind.
Thank you.
Don't clap between the phones. Save it here. Okay, this is called Trees. Trees are mute companions, looming through the winter mist from the side of the road, lit for a moment in passing by the car's headlamps, ash and oak, chestnut and yew. Witnesses, huge, mild beings who suffer the consequence of sharing our planet and cannot move away from any evil we subject them to, whose silent absolution hides the scars of our sins, who always forgive, yet still assume the attributes of judges, not victims. Now, I'm going to read a couple of poems about my mother. connected to my mother. The war that's referred to in this poem is the Second World War. And during the Second World War, my father, who was in the RAF, was away from us for several years. The poem is called Handbag. My mother's old leather handbag, crowded with the letters she carried all through the war. The smell of my mother's handbag, mints and lipstick and coty powder. The look of those letters, softened and worn at the edges, opened, read and refolded so often. Letters from my father, odour of leather and powder, which ever since then has meant womanliness and love and anguish and war. And as I said, this also is about my mother. And the thing is that I didn't ever write a poem about my mother during her lifetime. And then after her death, I found I was writing quite a lot about her. And I felt so sorry that she hadn't realised that she could be an inspiration for me. This is called The Crescent. My stick of lip salve is worn away into the same curved crescent. That was the first thing I noticed about my mother's lipstick. It marked the pressure of her existence upon the world of matter. Imagine the grim fixity of my stare, watching her smear the vivid grease across her lips from a tube shiny as a bullet, the way she smoothed it with the tip of a little finger. The tinge it left, even after washing her hands, explained the name Pinky, and her pointed tongue licking out like a kitten's, fascinated, irritated. It was part of the mystery of brassiers and compacts and handbags that meant being grown up. I thought my own heel would have to grow a sort of spur to squeeze right down the narrow hollow inside high heels. Now I'm calmer and no longer paint my lips except with this, pale as a koshered carcass drained of blood in salty water, or a memorial candle, wax congealed down one side, as though it stood in the wind that blows from the past, flame reflected like a crescent moon against a cloud in the pool of molten light. I carry the sign of the moon and my mother, a talisman in a small plastic tube in my handbag, a holy relic melted by believers' kisses. And every time I smooth my lips with the unguent, I feel them pout and widen in the eternal smile of her survival through me. Feel her mouth on mine. Now I'm going to read a poem. It's called Friends Photos. And, oh, wait a minute, on page 380. And this, I'm sure, this is an experience that everyone here has had. Looking at photos, looking at old photos. Yeah. looked like goddesses and gods, glowing and smooth, sheathed from head to foot by a golden essence that glistened and refracted its aura of power, the wonderful icon called youth. We moved as easily as dolphins surging out of the ocean, cleaving massed tons of transparent water streaming away in swathes of bubbling silver like the plasm of life. Still potent from those black and white photos, the palpable electric charge between us, like the negative and positive poles of a battery, or the fingers of Adam and God. We were beautiful, without exception. I could hardly bear to look at those old albums, to see the lost glamour we never noticed when we were first together, when we were young. And then I said that I'd written a lot of poems about Sybil, so I'm going to read you one. It's called Elegant Sybil. Having become an expert at false tones, as the voices slide lower or higher than intended, out of control, having heard so many lies, seen so many faces altering crazily, trying to hide their real motives, having pondered the fate of those who came to consult her, and how little difference any words make, her gaze is now withdrawn and watchful as a diplomat's. Her lips, though still full, meet firmly in a straight, hard line. But her feathered cloak and tall headdress of glorious plumage are so elegant, no one can resist her. The emperor comes to hear her pronounce almost daily. All the rich men's wives copy her style. Alone at last, she strips off her regalia, lets the fine cloak drop to the floor, pushes strong fingers through the stubble of cropped hair, and climbs into the deep stone bath of water so cold that even at the height of summer she shudders, and in winter the effort of will the action demands has become her greatest indulgence. Only then is she able to think of the god and wait his pleasure. Now I'm going to read just a couple from the new book. This is called The Motorway. I was born in the motorway era. We both were. He used to say it made him happy to see me writing in the car, in the passenger seat. We drove the motorways, going north on the M1, all the routes through France heading south, west from Nashville to San Diego, north to San Francisco, then east again across the continent to Montauk Point. You driving, me writing. Sometimes I'd be aware you'd quickly turn your head sideways, only for a moment shifting your gaze from the road. One flick of your eyes to watch me making notes. I laughed and said, "It's perfect. You driving, me writing, let's go on like this forever. And you smiled and agreed. But we didn't. There were other things to do. And now it's impossible. You're dead. And I'm driving with another person, with someone else. I stare through the windscreen into the distance as the pylons draw their lines of power across the green and brown and yellow fields, the landscape of small hills, hedges and streams you taught me to understand. Stare into the distance, as if by looking hard enough, I'll find that place where the two sides of the road meet and unite. And then, as the last poem in this reading, I'll read the title poem of the collection and also of your show in somewhere else entirely. Where did you sleep last night? Where did you sleep? I feel we spent the night together. But when I wake, always earlier than the alarm is set, you're never here. Strange, the empty bed. I scan the other rooms, and though I seem to remember an evening like one of hundreds of evenings spent together, so many years together, peaceful evenings, each of us at our desk, the sense of someone else in the flat, you in your room, then going to bed, affection, embraces, intimacy. Now everything is different. I walk along the hall, enter each room, uneasy, seeking, but find no sign. Although every room retains so many memories, sounds and images, is saturated with your essence, I know I'll never meet you here. Where you sleep, day and night, is dark and cold and silent, somewhere else entirely.
Thank you, Ruth. Follow that, Emily. Yes, of course, the last... Did you arrive at the title through the poem, or was it just something in conversation? Because suddenly it does take on a... Now I hear Ruth reading it, the film, yes, it's kind of this portrait of something. I could talk about that, but maybe you... How did you arrive at the title then? Was it...
I wanted to put a poem in the film, and the more time I spent with Ruth and the more time I spent in Ruth's flat, the more I was aware that Alan was no longer there. Alan Silvertoe, Ruth's husband, who had died before I met Ruth, about a year before, I think. It's the whole, and that poem is a memorial poem, isn't
Yes.
it?
Yes.
And it just seemed a way of bringing that love that you had together as well, and your lives together. I was in your life, but I was also in a place where Alan had been, and it seemed important. So so that poem seemed the one to use.
Yeah, it makes such sense.
Yeah.
Honestly, it really does. And as a portrait, that is a kind of motif in the film for me. It's when Ruth introduces that in a fragmented way. You suddenly realise there's a loss, but it's not in a tragic loss. It's kind of like in a very meaningful, expressive way. And the film has this, I used the word when we spoke before, kind of lament, but in a really positive way. It's kind of a missing, but that, I don't mean that negatively. I mean it in a very positive space that it occupies.
Yes, I feel that, and I'm so grateful to Emily. Thank you. Yeah.
And I think in a way, for both of us to see it, it's taken of course when you make a film like this, well when I have made this film, you don't see it, and then to see it, I mean Josh and did this unbelievable installation that took over a week in that gallery to make that film look so extraordinary. It's not that it's just okay, it's actually been installed in probably the best way that it probably ever will be. And just to see the seamlessness between the images for a start, and the amount of work to make it look so good. And I think for both of us, of course, we've never seen it, we've seen it on a small screen always. So to go in there, it was quite overpowering, wasn't it?
Yes.
You stole my last words. I was just going to say what an amazing job Josh and the team and Tom did.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm on the academic chair for the gallery, and it's extraordinary how it transforms the space. And obviously, a bit what you're describing, I've known about the film all the way through its process, but never seen it. And you're nervous. I was nervous, gosh, what's it going to be like? And then to see it was kind of totally, it occupies a space, which film can be very awkward sometimes, I think. You know, you have to be a bit passive and receive it. Whereas it just occupies the space in there, and the sound quality, the lighting, and the portrait on the wall.
Yeah,
I think
Josh came to my studio and saw these brushes, and I was thinking, what on earth is he going to think? And he drew on his computer this little diagram of these screens, and then he talked later about the screens hugging the audience in a way, holding the audience together. And you got it immediately. You knew exactly how it was going to be with one photo that was going to be lit, and all this space around. That's pure and pure brilliance of what it is actually.
Yeah.
I mean, as a filmmaker, I had no idea, or a photographer, I had no idea that it would work like that. I imagined, in fact, when I wrote it up, I said a 3-screen projection on walls. And I said to Josh, why can't it just be on the walls? And he said, well, that's, it's sort of lazy. You don't do that in a gallery. And so what was the explanation?
But for yourself, Ruth, I don't know, did you share parts of the film during the process? Did you know?
A little bit. Yeah, we did after, but sometimes I can show you the rushes straight after we filmed it. You remember on my computer?
Yes.
Just to see the sense of how it looked. And you might say, oh, I like it or something.
Yeah.
But when you came up for the opening, that was the first time you've...
Yes.
Yeah, gosh. I can't imagine. Yeah. Well, you're here, so it must have been okay.
Indeed.
Yeah. It's it's a beautiful piece of work. You use that word very rarely, but it is. It's something about, you talked earlier about portraiture, which perhaps has been a bit superseded culturally by our, Facebook and telephone.
Yeah, exactly.
How we read each other facially through our mobile phones. This is another completely different idea of what it means to create a portrait. And in your case, I think the really interesting thing is like a moving portrait, where an object is as much as the portrait, as a tree, as a boiling pot of an egg, as images of Ruth herself, and the text, and how it again begins to combine to make this portrait. There's something really special about that. So the last bit before we should open it was, what's next, Emily? Do tell us a bit more about the printed that you're now working on.
A single screen film, which will be about an hour. And again, the soundtrack has been edited.
Okay.
And some of the images that you've seen will be used, but in different ways. And then I'm filming more that I want to put in as well. So that's what I'm doing now.
And you've been filming recently?
Yeah,
Yes.
last week. In fact, we were going to do it this week, and then with a day off. But we've been doing it recently.
I'll say off.
But I do get a sense that it's quite important to keep going while the momentum's there. For me, it's taken. I'd like to get that film out in the next 6 months or something. I get the final funding for. It's the post-production that's
the cost,
yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
Yes.
But most of it's shot, so they're just a bit of editing and so on. But it's the colourist and the sound; those two things are absolutely vital. And again, very brilliant colourist.
Yeah. It is what realises the work
Totally.
with you, and then working
Well, it's
together.
like when you print, I mean, I print black and white because I know how it should look. I certainly couldn't work with the printed film on my own without a colourist, a trained person, who actually, Jason F. Moffat, who did it, was actually trained as a photographer, so we're speaking the same language as well, which is fantastic.
Yes. And just again to mention when you come into the foyer, there's a really lovely film that Reese Straw made for us at the gallery. And again, I really encourage you, we've now got a listening dome above so you can hear the soundtrack. I think there you get, again, a really great insight into something, a relationship basically. It's about Emily, but it's about this relationship. And it gives you another insight into this process. So if you haven't watched it, I really would. It's a great piece of work. Okay. Thank you so much, both of you. But I think we should open it to the floor. If people have got any questions or observations, I've got maybe one thing we could just end on. But please, if anyone's got any. Yes, we have a hand at the front.
Do you need me to use a microphone?
Sounds good so far. Yeah, thanks.
So I'm hoping this is not a comment, but I'm feeling my way towards the question. The film, just because it's about a poet and the focus on a poet, made me think of Tacitus Dean's work with Anne Carson, I think it was, and because of the stillness of it and the pace of it.
Michael Hamburger.
Michael Hamburger.
Yeah. Who's another poet. She made a film about Michael Hamburger, the poet who's collecting apples in an orchard.
It was definitely a woman, and I think it was
Okay.
Anne Carson. Anyway,
Okay.
but my sense of that film was it felt like watching something where the poet was in third person, and this feels much more like first person. And I know you've described kind of it's a process of going through the artistic process of not knowing to find out what it will be. And I wondered how much you thought about or chosen between Ruth being subject and object, and how much you felt you were subject or an object of the film, and how much you felt you were co-creating it.
No, I feel it's Emily's work. Yeah.
So do you feel done unto, or what's the experience of it for you?
Perfectly acceptable. Yeah. Yes. Actually no difficulties have arisen, have they?
No, and I describe it as a collaboration.
Yes.
In that it's been such an easy conversation, really.
Yes.
But I suppose, I mean, you're talking about kind of power dynamic, is that what you're getting at?
More about, so is it you both exploring what comes out of it, or is it just completely focused what you can see of Ruth moving, Ruth doing things?
I mean, it's directed, of course, because of the way it's edited and what I've chosen to film. So, of course, it's subjective from that point of view, but it's collaborative in that I was working with Ruth all the way through and showing her as we were going and talking about what I thought would be good to film, whether there would be, I mean, there were insides of your cupboards, and I love the idea of filming, is you don't want the inside, you know, because of the way the vegetables, and the tins are stacked, and Ruth didn't want that, that's absolutely fine. But, so it's collaborative, but I think it's probably sort of equal power parts. I don't know that film that you were describing though, I'd be interested to see that Tacitus Dean film, because we went specifically to see the Michael Hamburger film, because I thought that was such a beautiful film by Tacitus Dean.
Yeah.
When it was on at the Frith. Yeah.
I kind of sense, it's the kind of common observation. I think it would be very easy, kind of ethically really problematic to go in and, particularly with a lens, using behind the lens to object, subject, you know. But my feeling is that there's something about this relationship, and it's kind of emotional, intimate relationship that allows this. It doesn't feel artificial, it doesn't feel constructed. There's never a point in the film where I'm thinking, gosh, you look awkward, or that must have been weird. What were you doing? You know, it just feels very natural. And I think you're very respectful, Emily, with the camera. What you choose to kind of leave quiet, rather than, you know, the televisual in your grill sort of thing. It's respectful, and I think that must say something about your relationship together.
Yes.
Definitely, and years and years and years of making portraits of people and being in situations, you know, in their, maybe in their domestic situation or whatever.
Yeah.
And being allowed, I mean, I think it's a great privilege to be allowed to, or to be, for someone to sit for me when I'm taking their portrait, in this case Ruth, for a long, long time, and that's an incredible privilege I have.
Yeah, because you've talked in the past about the portraits you've made before, sometimes are deliberately constructed. But this isn't, to me, it doesn't feel like that.
Not in the same way.
Yeah.
That's right. It's different. Yeah, they're different parameters, absolutely. And editing and so on. I mean, film gives me a freedom. Film with sound and movement gives me a freedom that I cannot have with photography. Full stop.
Yeah.
So yes.
Particularly the 3 screen
Yeah.
that allows this movement.
That's true. Yeah.
Attention as well.
Totally.
Yes.
There.
Thanks. Thanks.
I think what is, for me, very poignant about the film has partly to do with the relationship with text as well, and the way that the text and the image are allowed to cohabit.
I'm not quite getting this. I'm hearing it, I mean.
I can.
Yeah.
It's something about the relationship in the film between the text and the image, and how they talk to each other.
Yes.
Yeah, it's how they sort of cohabit. And it's interesting that Emily said that she did the soundtrack first, you know, so that the images come, as it were, at the behest of the sound. But there's also the relationship to description, to describing, and to allow the images to describe themselves, which I think is in some ways kind of complementary to the more condensed material in the poetry, which is very, very much there. So that thing about time, on the one hand you have this description in the pictures that is just all the time, just being there, and then on the other hand you have a very different kind of time. The poem, the bits in the film about Ruth's mother, going backwards and forwards into memory. And there's something very photographic about that. You know, what photographs and memory and film do. And those things just sit very nicely, I think. I mean, it is a film, but it's also an homage to the still photograph.
Totally, that's exactly right, Jim. And when I say that I had already made a storyboard of all the bits from the film which were going to go. I knew where they were going to go and how it was going to work as just as still images, and then we cut the sound. So absolutely right, it's absolutely a homage to the still. Yeah, which is really interesting because we're really at that moment now.
Yeah.
Where we don't really know where we are with the still.
Yeah. And we don't know where we are with the document either.
Yeah, that's right.
And that question of documentary, for me, was the first thing that I thought about when I saw the film. I thought this, you know, it can be thought through this moment and this problem that we have now.
I'm going to do what Ruth did. That's art. Gee. That's what art's capable of, I think. It's suspending, in a really good way, disbelief and belief, apprehension, comprehension. You're not sure where you are. That's art, in the way that poetry suspends your animation of something and creates a new animation of something. And hearing the poems again, with the images in mind, the images, I mean, extraordinary combination. It's wonderful in the poetry. I mean, it's descriptive and it's poetic.
Completely, yeah.
I mean, again, I'm imagining kind of what a moving experience, Emily, you know, in relation to you must have gone away and read the poems and obviously the conversations with Ruth. And like you say, being in, I mean, it looks an extraordinary apartment, apart from a house, you know, and how you tackle that without being really documentary or kind of superficially a bit kind of flashy about look at this and look at this, but actually, again, this process of time and allowing the images and listening to the images and listening to the conversation that the work produces and having to kind of hold to that rather than jumping in and going, I can make this look brilliant if I did this or if I did that. And I think
It's anti-Trixie.
there is something
Totally. And it was that, and one of the remits, or one of the things that I discussed in the Arts Human AHRC application was this slowness. We so need, I feel we need, and particularly working with young students, we so need to slow down. So I'll often put students in front of 10:8 camera and they're looking through the ground glass and they suddenly see what an image looks like. I mean, it's inverted, but they suddenly really look.
You have to.
And we don't have enough of that time. There's not that time. That time isn't given to things. And I wanted attention, and I wanted to underline that as well, obviously. Yeah. And Ruth's poetry, of course, is visual. It's also so complex. You need that density. I wanted that density as well.
Yeah.
The image to reflect.
It came on with the film then, isn't it?
Sue, it was to Ruth initially anyway, which was, you talked about two different processes of inspiration when you write, and one purely inspiration and individual, and the other one responding to an artist or subject. So I wondered if you could say a little bit more about the difference between those two processes initially, and then my sort of addendum to that would be, did this working relationship and working with the film inspire any poetry? So that was a sort of...
No, actually, I haven't written anything particularly in relation to the film. No. I mean, like that poem, Friends' Photos, I mean, you know, the process of photography and the results of photography and the meaning of photography, portraiture especially, of course, it is of great interest to me. Yes. But I haven't pondered this process that you've been going through and thought about writing anything. No, I mean, that's your department. Yeah. In this project, yes. Yes.
I kind of like that as well. It's sort of respectful in a sense.
Yes, I mean, you commented on Emily's work being respectful of mine. Yeah, and so I feel the same respectfulness, yes. This gentleman is longing to ask you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are we? Hi, and welcome back to Nottingham. On the radio this morning, I think I was listening to something about a film of the Vermeer exhibition, and it struck me that there was a similarity to it, in that you were given, as you were saying, and as you were both saying, about time to look at things.
Yes.
In a way, I went to Morrison exhibition in London last weekend, and whilst there was time to look, and they were saying that people in exhibitions spend more time reading the text than they do looking at things. But in this, did you feel that you had? I mean, I was caught very much by the images of the books.
Of the what?
Of the books, you know,
Some of
the,
the
the lovely covers and the end pieces of the
Yes.
books. Do you feel now that when you're at home, you look at it a little bit differently because of,
The film.
yeah,
Mm. I don't quite know how to answer that.
okay.
I'm not really aware of it having affected the way
Mhm.
it looks to me.
Mhm.
But I might have been avoiding thinking about it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think I won't think about it for a little while longer.
Yeah, I can see that. You've got lots of time to think.
Yeah.
We have, two pens. I don't know who was first, so
I just wanted to ask Emily how did it feel working in colour? Because I know you worked a lot in black and white, and then
It's a good question. Yeah, my last portrait book was black and white, that's true. I love working in colour, actually. And I like the way you can change colour. And that's something that I work with the colourist to do, and also the way that the colour, you can make certain colours really sing together, depending on how, like when you're colour printing. And that's a very, very exciting area for me. I've been a big colour printer in the past, so I've shot a lot of colour. It's just that last book was black and white. It's very freeing for me, colour. They always say it looks like the world, of course it doesn't. Not the way that you can use colour. And I don't know, what did you think, Ruth, about the way the colour was used in your inside? It looks like your apartment, doesn't it?
I think so, yeah.
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 Slightly subdued, maybe.
Yeah, I think that the colour is wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. Yes, I mean, if I think about the film and colour, I mean, it is the vegetation.
Yeah, exactly. Vivid.
Yes. That comes,
for
that
me
I think
too.
of first,
Yeah, it's inside and outside.
Yeah,
Yes.
totally.
light.
That's
Yes.
right, exactly.
And there's a different spatial feel,
Yeah.
and it breathes differently. I think that's again part of the
Yeah.
art, how it
Yeah.
works together, inside and outside. Yeah. And then, you had
So this question is for Ruth, and this probably is like the most basic question, so I apologize.
she's a question for you. She's
Yes.
saying it might be very basic. Question for you.
But is your home the only space that you write poems, or is there different space or different place that you write poems and get inspired to write them?
Is home, she's asking, are there different spaces where you write? And is home the main space where you would write? Or do you have different spaces that might inspire different either themes or ideas of writing? Or
No, I've always worked at home.
Yeah.
Yeah. I tried once, a long time ago, to work in a separate place. I rented a room for a while, but it just felt so artificial and peculiar.
So it wasn't like a going to work job, you just couldn't.
No. I mean, because writing poetry is part of my being, you know, and so it's just where I am at home.
Mm.
And I didn't really, I realised I didn't need a special place.
Yes.
Yes.
It's kind of an important question, I think, what you
Yes.
phrased there, where one feels possible to do things. And in a way, the film is also a portrait of Ruth's home. I mean, very much. I mean, it's some beautiful shots of rooms, you know, the Vermeer, the idea of just a room, you're looking at a room, that's, yeah.
The flat has got incredible daylight as well. Your flat has got extraordinary daylight on
Yes.
3 sides, hasn't it?
Yes.
And that's also a real advantage to working on filming. It
Yes.
doesn't have to be lit.
No.
So it's shot mainly in just natural
Yeah,
light.
some light coming through.
You get that sense.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of Bellatar thing again. It's just
Oh yeah,
these-
Bellatar.
These rooms that just,
Mm.
wow. And it just lingers for a while. Yeah, sure. Yes.
I just wanted to say that I've not watched the film, but I can feel listening to what you're saying, I can feel there's a connection with you two. Feels like your mother and daughter a bit. It's really interesting, so I'm quite curious to watch the film. I'm going to go watch it tomorrow.
You must.
Yeah. And there's this kind of, the way you're talking about the film, it makes you think about music. This sense of space and things coming in, and the fact that you chose the music before. So it's interesting, and then the pace and rhythm of it. Also, I'm really looking forward to watching it. Actually.
Yeah. Take your time with the film. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Amazing exhibition, amazing film, and the way it's staged is really impressive. It makes it a very, very immersive experience. And I've only seen it for 10-15 minutes, but I felt like I was in the place, in the location. And was it your intention to give that impression, or was it much more about Ruth?
You saw it early on, didn't you, when I was starting. Was my intention to make it immersive? Well, I mean, that's of course that's absolutely brilliant if it can do that. But you can't, I don't know if I went out with that intention. But if it has, a piece of work takes on its own, it takes on its own world. It's, you know, it's now out there in the world, and then how people respond to it it's been very, very positive and very interesting, but I wasn't sure that's how people would necessarily respond to it.
How did you go about editing? I mean, I've edited a lot of films and done some trips.
Yeah, on Avid, yeah.
And it's really difficult editing. And
I don't edit, I sit with an editor. I can assure you I don't do it. It's not my thing. I know what I want, but I don't work like really, really quickly with Avid or something. You know, he can just do it in seconds. Or an editor can do it all the time. Who does it all the time can work. And I say what I'd like. And as I said to Jean, I had the storyboard, so the pictures were there.
yeah.
So someone said, well, why are those pictures of Brighton in there? The point was that Ruth lived in Brighton at some points earlier in her life, but in the single screen I'll make that more clear. So there are sort of random pictures in there which may or may not make, well, not literal sense anyway.
There are instances where Ruth's talking about bookcase and bookcases there.
That's true, that's
There's
right.
other areas
Yeah,
where-
about her aunt's bookcase, about your aunt's bookcase.
Yes.
That seemed such an important story, and I wanted you to see that. And also because it had been in Virginia, and you'd had it shipped over, and they made sure that you were going to get it, and it had been such an important place for you.
Yes.
I mean, your aunt had been such an important person in your life,
Yes.
and also that introduced you to literature and art and
That's
music. So that was really, really significant, that piece of furniture. And that was the reason
And
the
you
title.
said you work quite instinctively, so were there parts of the edit where instinctive things happened or accidents happened and you left them in? Was it quite focused on
I have to think about that, Jonathan, I'll come back to you. I can't think of where accidents happened that I came back to, but I'll think about that. I'm sure there were.
That's a fabulous piece of work, amazing staging.
Yeah.
It feels Venice Biennale sort of standard.
Yeah, we need a London venue. I'm looking for it.
Many venues.
Yeah, many venues. Yeah, because the Wellington Gallery will tour this show, so it'll be great, yeah, to get it into other places. Yeah, international, we've got subtitles, so that helps. Language-wise.
Absolutely.
Could be interesting on a headset. Yeah.
Probably, yes, except to be the opposite of what I'm trying to do. You know those headsets people wear. They look really good on.
yeah, something about something that's absorbing. You're absorbed by it. And again, the things we've touched on about the editing and the time and the space. There's a lightness to it as well, which I didn't talk about earlier. And I'm really, touched by moments where Ruth's talking about her dad or her mum, and this kind of, you talk about yourself, your relationship, being stubborn with your father. It's got this lightness as well, which is a very human thing, I think. That is part of how the art absorbs you, rather than just looking at it. You enter in, and again, listening to you read, Ruth, it's just absorbing to hear the words and your pace of your voice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to pick up on the idea of being interior to something, because as a writer of poetry, it did feel like falling into the process of how poetry works as well, the way that you have got the time scales running simultaneously, yet they're different, and you're focusing on different images and which comes to the fore and how you present them as a whole. So there was something that kind of reflected the process of crafting a poem, as well as seeing a beautiful film in front of us.
Great.
No, thanks.
It's lovely to hear that.
Yeah. I think we'll take one more. I think G.
Well, it's just kind of thinking about the whole, the word immersion, and in relation to how one thinks about that in a contemporary way, where you are in a computer-generated world, and where there is no outside, and there's no time. It's about, in a sense, a kind of response, and there's nothing outside of being in this. I've seen a lot of art exhibitions recently that seem to be moving towards that. So there's something about this exhibition which is not immersive, because the text demands you to actually stand back from it a bit. I felt when I was looking at it that I went in and out of it in my own time, and that the 3 screens allowed me to do that. I couldn't concentrate on them all at once. I had to be guided sometimes by the words, and sometimes just by being willfully, I'm not going to look at that, I'm going to look at the other screen, right? Because I don't, that's just a wee bit too much for me right now. And I want to look at the waves and think about movement, actually, which I think the waves were very important for. So I'm not sure about the immersive thing. I'm not sure about that as the way that we understand it in contemporary terms. But it's and Duncan, you have spoken a lot about time, about the way in which the whole notion of time is very important to it. So there's a time on the part of the viewer as well, her own time as she approaches the work. And what's wonderful about it is that it allows that.
Very good. Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's the definition of immersive.
Yeah. Okay, you can do it. Okay. Firstly, thanks everyone. And I think if you join me in thanking Emily and Ruth so much for everything they're doing, everything they've done, and will continue to do. And may the forces be with you both. Josh, if I could ask you, we do have some books for sale. How, if people want to buy them, what's the best thing? Card. And they see you?
Yeah.
So we have a book of Emily's portraits and some of Ruth's poems, if anyone is interested. But thanks again, everyone. Okay.
Thank you.